Our next speaker is also a creative person, started working on Photoshop. His team helped build the designs and run the show at some of the Adobe Maxes before he became VP of brand and community at Groq and learned a lot of LLMs. But he's also a musician and just shared with me some albums that he kind of helped out with on Apple Music. Mark Heaps is the next speaker. He wanted to be here live, but there was an urgency that did not allow him to be here live with us. Therefore, he spent a few hours this morning to come up with this recording.
Hey everybody, really glad to be here joining the Adobe developer community for this online web event today. And special shout out to Ingo for inviting me to take part. I've been involved with Adobe for about 27 years now. And I think this is the first time I've actually spoke with the developer community, so really exciting to be here. My name is Mark Heaps, and I am reachable if anybody wants to reach out after this event on social media. I use the same handle everywhere, @LifeByPixels, mostly active on LinkedIn and Twitter, or I guess now we call it X. And a little background on me. So I am a professional creative, formerly have my education in design and art, but I've always been a technologist at the same time as my creative pursuits. And currently I am not working anywhere, but formerly I was working at Apple, at Google, at Duarte, and I recently just left from Groq. And I'll talk a little bit about why that's relevant to today's talk around Inference, the AI landscape, and supporting 1 million developers, which was this insane growth that we had at Groq. A little bit about my role at Groq, though, which is where I just left and had spent the last 5 years. Groq was a small startup where I was the VP of brand and creative. It was an amazing journey helping them, raise a considerable amount of capital, helping them develop that product, being a part of the go-to-market strategy, landing some of our early customers, and being out in the world representing that technology. So if you haven't checked into Groq, basically the core of their story is that the company invented a new type of processor specifically for AI inference, which is called an LPU. So once we figured out that we had something really, really special in regards to inference performance, and specifically low latency speed, we made that available to the world via cloud. And I think that's going to be really relevant for today's topic for developers that are building apps and plugins and solutions for the enterprise or general everyday users. But the growth was really crazy because once we made this accessible to the world of developers, we went from literally 0 developers on our cloud system in the developer environment to over 1 million registered developers in 53 weeks. On top of that, my team and I actually took part in over 50 hackathons, and we met over 3,000 developers in person where we were boots on the ground, listening to what they were looking for and what sort of applications or solutions were they building using transformer models and voice models, etc. So let's dive in a little bit. How did we get to this place with 1 million developers? What was the core strategy that I developed there to excite people about this chip and what it could actually do? What we realized was we had to show people what was possible and then challenge them to see what they would build on top of the foundation resources we provided them. And this is how we actually, saw such an accelerated growth to 1 million developers. And then we had these demo showcases with all these applications that we built that were really like living documents that we were constantly updating and iterating on. Similar to this and on a much more grand scale and a much broader capability is what we see incumbents like NVIDIA doing, who are also, demonstrating the art of the possible. I was just on build.nvidia.com last night playing with this new consistory service that they have actually in their environment. And it's amazing to see the volume of models they have, and it's so much more broad than a lot of the startup playgrounds and consoles have, where you can really try just every edge of AI technology. So let's talk a little bit about that inference low latency scale. So I want to show an example real quick for people that may not be familiar. And I'm just going to use a simple LLM chat screen recording that I did last night to be able to show you this. So what you're going to see here is on the left, I was just using ChatGPT. And what this is I'm typing in a prompt saying, hey, create an itinerary for a summer weekend trip to Paris with my family of 4, which happens to include 2 teenagers. And so what it's doing here is it's going to build that itinerary. Now on the right, you've got a system that's engineered to be fast for inference, and that was Groq. And you can see it's already done. And it's unbelievably fast in the way that it can actually generate these results. Now, as I go back to the other side and scroll, you can actually see at the end here, it's still finishing. Now, there's a lot of factors there. Different models, different technologies, different infrastructure, different systems. But these were on both on the same network in regards to the endpoint here, my home, with really, really fast internet. But that speed is what we found developers really, really cared about. And the low latency sort of unlocked that art of the possible for them to say, well, what kind of applications can we build if we have that sort of low latency? And I think this completely changed the conversation around AI applications. The idea that you could have interfaces with real-time fluid and fluent conversational voice interaction, unlike maybe our more traditional Siri or Alexa type of experiences. Today, you're hearing voices that sound natural and rhythmic with believable inflection. And that's really because of the focus on improving inference from companies like Groq, NVIDIA, and others. This is one of my other favorite examples, though. This was built by a developer for us, whose name is Daniel Hernandez. He's a great developer. And he built this one called Stream of Thought to Text. And to me, it also showed the iterative nature when you have really fast inference. So let me just show this same sort of approach. And you'll hear my recording from last night. Create an itinerary for a summer weekend in Paris for a family of 4 with 2 teenagers. Man, that's fast. Can you add a budget for the end of each day of what I'll expect to spend? So you can see me iterating here, and it's editing in real time. Can you make sure that all suggestions for food are vegetarian friendly? Again, constantly making updates. And it's showing me the updates with his clever UI design. So this is brilliant, right? Because something like that in the past would have required Google searches and copy and paste and building into my document. And I imagine something like this existing in programs like Adobe InDesign, where I want to be able to highlight all the text within my document or within a section or a text box and just iterate on it and talk to it. And that gets back to this theory that I've had for a very long time, that we're going to actually see all of our applications with the next generation of user move towards a language user interface. And that doesn't exclusively mean language with regards to your voice, but also all things that are language. Math is a language, art is a language, gesture is a language, code is a language, right? There's more than just the word of the LLM that's generated that is the language component of this. I was really happy to see recently that Adobe had like a beta preview. I saw it from Howard Pinsky that showed an operator where you're literally prompting in and it's running Photoshop and actually making actions happen. Then we saw the new output of the new actions panel. And I think these are drips towards the lake that's coming of a future user experience. So I'm not a developer in the sense of someone who codes, but I am a designer and I have created software in the past where I've usually partnered with engineers. And recently we've seen this whole movement towards vibe coding and the tools that are getting created. And I just want to show a little bit about that because that was something that one of our engineers actually worked on when I was still at Groq that was called appgen.groqlabs.com. And this would allow me to make little micro apps that were sort of interesting. And I use this all the time for creating team sorters for my kids' basketball league and more. So let me just type one in here. So let's say create an interactive visual display representing frequency and amplitude on a sine wave on a chart. Slide controls that change the amplitude and frequency as a visual tool. All right, let's see what that makes. So we'll create that. You can see here it's generating the code on the left, and there you go, there's my sine wave visualizer. And here I can see my amplitude on one axis, and I can see the frequency on the other axis, right? Making this a higher pitch or a lower pitch. So I went from there and I really started diving into Google Gemini's Canvas and what they call Firebase Studio. And so you can see here, here's another representation of that, where it's got a lot of iterative prompting going on. And in here, one of the cool things is it will actually play audio. So you can hear that audio and I can change the frequency. Right? Now, I didn't code any of that, but this becomes a very rapidly creatable tool. And I think about what this means for teachers who want to make tools for their classroom. What does this mean for people that are building presentations to describe travel or logistics or more? They can describe an app that they want, iterate on it, and get something very, very powerful to communicate to their audience and end user. Recently, I've been diving a little bit out of Firebase Studio, which is a great service. It's a little bit limited in the sense of I don't really know in the back end which models I'm using. There's a lot there that has to be unpacked unless you actually read the code. But I recently got into Lovable, and this was the same prompt, and you can see all of my iterations here late last night, which actually allows you to play a wave, and you can hear that there. And I can turn that up. And then I can actually just move this dial around and change the pitch or the frequency, but I can play a second wave over it. And this is kind of like stacking chords on a piano. It's stacking notes to make chords on a piano. So again, fully interactive. I can remove that frequency. And this took me, you can see the timestamps here, 7:45 until 9:30-ish. You can actually see 45 minutes. I built a working wave visualizer with a frequency controller, amplitude, and audio output. That's amazing to me. And I think this is really where we're heading with the capability of designers getting involved with development of applications. So bringing it maybe a little closer to home for some of the designers that are in the audience, this is an example of a tool that I built inside of Gemini. Again, just describing with prompts what I wanted and then iterating. And you can see on the side, there's a pretty extensive history here. I built this maybe a month or so ago, but all of this was completely generated by Gemini. So what I've got in here in this palette playground that was created was something where you can actually choose a color. So let's choose something like, maybe a really nice green. And you can see it says new design styles are ready. And so this color picker, I don't even know what library that's coming from. It was auto-generated. I just said, make a color picker like Photoshop or other design tools, and it added that for me. And that's how you can iterate as simply as that. So here's my hex value that's generated, and I wanted it to show that. And then you can see it chooses, or it sets a design style down at the bottom. But what's interesting is if I go in here and actually add additional project notes. So I'm going to say this brand will be for a garden center that is also a coffee shop for the city of Austin, Texas, where I live. And then down here, that prompt will be taken into consideration as it creates a design style. So if I say modern, you can see it actually generates a palette here. And then the one really interesting thing is, so it generates this palette, which you can see, and I even told it any of these that you produce, when you press it, it'll actually copy it to your clipboard. So you get that hex value. I made it generate these little design styles inside of the window just so I can see what relationships and weights look like of those color tones together. Now I could try something more like tropical and let it generate that. And you'll see this will be completely different. New colors here. But what was really cool, we got an image generation error. Here you go. This is the real-time demos. But the important part was the download.ase, right? So that you have swatches that are usable inside of Adobe applications. I didn't know anything about that. I literally went on to another LLM with reasoning and said, what is the actual base of the format for the .ase file? And can I generate hex values into an ASE swatches file using code? It actually gave me the framework, the template for an ASE file. And I actually fed that into Gemini and said, make these colors downloadable as that. And so when you click this, it actually does download, it does install, and it does work inside of Illustrator and other applications. So I thought that was really, really cool because I really get tired of just copying and pasting my hex code. Since making those little demo apps for myself and those tools for myself, I've really gotten into all kinds of things: photo editors, auto cropping tools, batch processing tools, you name it. And I think we need to harken back to a time, I'm old enough to remember, when we started getting all these WYSIWYG tools for web design. And ultimately that blurred the lines between someone that was a designer that did layouts and graphics and illustration and content, and someone that actually built the functioning and working website. And of course, once that barrier of entry became easier, then the engineering got more complex, and we ended up having this rubber band effect where we're pulling and pushing and snapping to eventually advance, the capabilities of web and what we can do with our web pages. I think we're in that moment again right now with some of these early tools. Whether you're thinking about playground consoles that are available in these various sites, or if you're thinking about services like Poe. And if you haven't used Poe, I think this is a great site because you don't really want to be locked into any one service right now because the models are changing so frequently. So this is a great space where you can create your own GPTs and bots and more and workflows. And it gives you access to all of these different sites and services. So you can really do something quite dynamic with a lot of testing before you really spend any money to finalize what your application is. And you can see in here just the range of the bots and services that are accessible. And services like Toolhouse that give you access to all these sort of agentic and agent tools and MCP servers and more, where you can do scraping or RAG or similar. Again, these tools are just activating superpowers for the developer. So I think the big part to take away from this, though, is, am I building applications and tools that are local or cloud hosted? And this was a decision that I heard devs struggling with all the time when I was at various meetups, hackathons, and more regarding their infrastructure. And I think, honestly, the answer is, moving forward, it's going to be hybridized. When it's local or cloud, you're considering things like model size. What is the inference performance on it that matters? What is the competence, meaning the benchmark quality of results that you're getting out of those two environments? Do I need a bigger model to get better quality, or is a very simple model but with a really good RAG vector database going to suffice for the sort of task that I have? You are really going to see this hybrid cloud environment for agentic or compound styles of AI workflows. And we're already seeing that with mobile companies, right? Where they might actually have a voice model that's local on the phone, but it's actually calling out to the cloud for some of that higher level intelligence and probabilistic nature. We see this also within Adobe tools today, like Smart Portrait or Neural Filters, where it actually says this filter is processing image data in the cloud. Now, the trade-off there might be, is the user willing to wait that long? Some of these results are amazing, but they're really slow. And so I think this is something everyone has to take into the foundry stage of designing their applications of, I might get better results out of this, but could I do something with several sequences of smaller models localized? Or is there a way of breaking up the experience so that as it's running via the cloud, they're getting results, so psychologically it doesn't feel like a high batch wait on those results? And you see this with some preview generation and more. The other part that's getting really complicated is the subscription or pass-through on pricing. Once upon a time, you built a plugin, you sold it. You built a piece of software, you sold it. We've seen people move into these sort of licensing models and SaaS models. But input and output tokens are actually becoming a bit more of a commodity type of model. And that's really going to affect how you can price what you build. Think about the layers of agents involved and how each call to an agent is inputting and outputting, prefill and decode of your tokens, and that costs more money. And that may dictate the providers you use. Just as an example here, on the right, this was the exact same prompt. It said, tell me about extensibility in Adobe, and it generated an output. Now, the top result, which generated 725 tokens, that wasn't a reasoning model. That was a single shot LLM call. Whereas the bottom model is the top best in class open source reasoning model, which you may or may not want to use for geopolitical reasons. But I got almost the exact same quality of output, but it's nearly 10x more tokens generated. And so if I'm, as the creator, paying a service per token, and I need to pass that through to my end user, I really need to think, is the best in class, latest and greatest model what I need for my application? Because it could be increasing my costs by nearly 10x. And so that complicates some of your designs. And I'm finding that a lot of devs are now actually just doing a pass through where they're saying, hey, you can sign up with me. You're going to pay a certain rate for the service based on the tokens you generate. But you can get a discount for prepaid volume. And so again, really interesting time to be designing applications and plugins. So my last bit of advice here is what you build with and on is going to change constantly. And you should plan for this. You should have no loyalty to anyone as far as like, oh, I build with OpenAI, or I build with Claude and Anthropic, or I build with, insert company here, Mistral, Groq, whoever. It's going to change constantly. And what's going to matter most for you is how easy is it, can you swap the infrastructure out to continually provide the best value and price for your end user while getting the best quality of results contextually relevant to the task that they have. All right, and with that, my name is Mark Heaps. I think I went a little over time. I apologize, Ingo, but it's been great talking to everybody today. I'm really excited that I got to be here and take part, and I look forward to seeing what you guys build and engaging more with the community. So have a great rest of your event, and thanks everyone for letting me be here. Bye.